welcome to season 6 of Silver Lining for Learning, episode 2. Well, really, it's episode 229, can you believe it or not? We started back in 2020 during COVID, and we're still going. We're really proud, though, of the previous shows, but today is a special day because we're going to have a meeting of the minds of ed tech editors. That is the title of the show, anyways. We have wonderfully brilliant co-hosts with me today, Chris Stevie from Harvard, Punya Mishra from ASU, Lydia Kao from University of Toronto, where she's doing a postdoc with Marlene Scardamiglia, who I based my dissertation on, so I know she's getting great mentoring there at the University of Toronto. Chris, what do we have here in today's show?
Editors have an unparalleled view of the big picture of the field, who's doing what, and what are the strengths and weaknesses.
Great. And we have 3 of the big editors with us today. They've played a major role in what was being published, what was even being looked at, what was being thought about during the pandemic. And we all know that during the pandemic, more research was done on online learning, distance learning, and open education than in the previous 50 to 100 years. So they had a lot on their hands to look at and think about and contemplate and share with others. They were the gatekeepers and provided us with a reading material that we needed while we're all stuck at home. So today we're going to be asking them things like, how did the rankings change during COVID? And why did they skyrocket so much? Recent trends since COVID and the pandemic in the field of learning, design, and technology, or educational technology, or distance learning, open ed, all that. Recent and upcoming special issues of the journals that they're in charge of, and we'll come back to which journals those are. Significant challenges that they face as editors today and in the past 5 years, present journal goals, trends, things that we might consider in the future, people we might want to bring in after them. Punya, what do we have here?
Well, Kurt, when you asked that question in the beginning, all I could think of was how well-dressed you are compared to the rest of us, but I will not focus on that. I will focus on a question that every student of mine asks me, which is, what do these rankings really mean? Where do they come from? You know, it seems like a little mysterious black box to them. So I think it'll be very helpful for viewers to understand that process a little better. So back to you, Kurt.
I'm wearing my Ukrainian vest today, so everyone has to try something new, and I went off to Thailand and got this suit a few months ago, and it finally arrived. What we have, Punya, is we have 3 editors of the most important journals in learning, design, and technology. The Internet and Higher Education, Vanessa Dennen, Online Learning Journal, Peter Shea, and Distance Education, Som Naidu. Each of these are widely read and respected. OLJ, for instance, emerged from the ashes of the Journal of Asynchronous Learning Networks, JALN, which I relied on a lot in the past, and I read religiously. Somehow, that journal got disbanded, neglected, went under, I don't know, but he resurrected it with the Online Learning Journal. Each of these people, by the way, know tons more than most of us will ever know about the process of publishing in scholarly journals. Professor Som Naidu is a former pro-vice chancellor of flexible learning and the director of the Center for Flexible Learning at the University of the South Pacific, and a place I've often wanted to come visit. So maybe we could host a show there, actually. He's currently principal of Associate of Technology Education and Design Associates, a Melbourne-based educational technology consulting service, which right now in Melbourne, it's 7 a.m. So thanks for being with us, Som. Som spent most of his professional life in higher education sector in a variety of roles to do with enhancing learning and teaching in open, flexible, distance, and online learning, also distributed learning in education, generally in a variety of those formats. He possesses an undergraduate qualification from the University of Waikato, which we were just talking about before Som arrived, one of my favorite places in the world in New Zealand, along with graduate credentials from Concordia University in Montreal, which Lydia could tell him something about as well. She's a Canadian. He's a former president of the Open and Distance Learning Association of Australia. He served as executive editor, I think founding editor of Distance Education, not for 20 years, not for 25 years, but for over 30 years, and now he's kind of stepping off the slope and he's going to do something else. He just published, or they just published in Distance Education, a special issue on micro-credentials and their implications for lifelong learning, global insights and critical perspectives. What makes that special issue important, and all of our listeners need to go to this special issue, because a former guest of this show by the name of Mark Brown has his last publication in there, Micro-Credentials and the Implications for Lifelong Learning, is his article in there. He appeared on episode 152, and we wish Mark well and healing. We send him some healing wishes. He's now living in New Zealand. We all miss you, Mark. If you don't know, Mark was the chair of digital learning and the director of the National Institute for Digital Learning at Dublin City College. We also have with us Peter Shea, who's professor in the Department of Educational Theory and Practice with a joint appointment with the Department of Informatics in the College of Engineering and Applied Science. His research focuses on technology-mediated teaching and learning in higher ed. He's the author of numerous articles in online learning and the co-author of The Successful Distance Learning Student. He's a co-recipient of many, many, many awards, including EDUCAUSE Award for Systemic Progress in Teaching and Learning for the state of New York, Sloan Consortium Awards for Excellence in Faculty Development and Asynchronous Learning Network programs, and he's a Sloan C Fellow. And if you know Peter at all, you know he's heavily involved in the Online Learning Accelerate and Innovate conferences. He sets it up, he does the program, he even sells popcorn at the end, I think. Peter previously, before he became a professor, was an associate provost for online learning for the University of Albany, also providing leadership and strategy for online teaching and learning collaboration with administrators and academics across units. He's also was director of the SUNY Learning Network, an online education system of 24 colleges in the state of New York. Before he became a professor, he was running the whole show, and he's the one I went to for data for all my keynotes. He recently published a special issue in online learning of online and blended learning in the age of generative AI with Hazel Bay, an alum of my program, and Araz Baskurt, who was a guest in July 2021 on Silver Lining for Learning. And I'm using that, Peter. It's a great issue. So thank you for that. I'm thinking I used 2 of your issues. And finally, we have Vanessa Dennen, my colleague, my former student, my personal friend. We've done special issues of ETR&D and Online Learning Journal in the past few years since COVID. She is the associate editor for Computers in Human Behavior Reports. Previously, she was co-editor-in-chief for the Internet and Higher Education from 2014 to 2024, and 3 years as editor of Educational Researcher and special issues of ETR&D, online learning, distance learning, and the list goes on, and read her bio. She began her academic career at Syracuse and then came to Indiana, where she studied online learning networks. And she's explored other things more recently, like AI technologies, MOOCs, communities and online environments, social media in education, online learning engagement, all sorts of things. And now she's the Tyner Distinguished Professor of Instructional Systems and Technologies at Florida State University with over 100 articles, many books, including a book on global perspectives on educational innovations in emergency situations, the editor of the 2023 Handbook of Open Distance and Digital Education. And she's got other books. I'm sorry, Vanessa, I can't read them all. Lydia, what do we have here?
AI has been a recurring theme in the SLL show. So I'm wondering about the editor's bird's eye view of the trend in AI in education, as well as the impact of AI on the landscape of publication.
What we have here, Lydia, that's great. That was wonderful. It's better than what I got prepared. We've got 3 good friends of mine. And this is a way to sneakily get 3 friends of mine on Silver Lining for Learning by framing this as the editorial show. So, but we will talk about journals. In fact, I think this is an important topic that we might want to revisit down the road. Why don't all of you, Peter, Som, and Vanessa, add any little tidbits that you want to for my introduction, and along the way, tell us about the journal that you're the editor of and what you have been in particular focused on in terms of your mission for that journal. We'll start with Peter.
Well, thanks, Kurt. Yeah, I am the editor of the Online Learning Journal. There is nothing I want to add to my biography. I would actually like to subtract several things. But yeah, we are the journal that is published by a small nonprofit called the Online Learning Consortium. It's been around for about 28, 29 years, and our journal has been around for about 26 or 27 of those years. It was started by John Bourne and Frank Miatas back in the glory days of online learning, the early days, early 1990s. And yeah, it's still a small but mighty journal. We don't have a publisher behind us. We are our own publisher. We are our own enterprise. And yeah, I think your read on the increase in the number of submissions to journals is 100% right. I mean, we're seeing a gigantic increase in number of manuscripts that are submitted to our journal. And I'm sure the same is true for the other folks on the show. So yeah, I'll stop there and let other folks talk.
I'll jump on the manuscript submission thing. I'll make one amendment to my introduction. I was not the editor of Ed Researcher. I was an associate editor at Ed Researcher. That's a big job to be the editor of that journal. So yeah, the number of submissions, it continues to go up. And I think that it reflects what's happening institutionally right there. There is so much pressure on everybody to publish and to count the number of publications that are out there. So everybody's just writing and sending stuff out. I think that that raises some really interesting questions about, does that have an effect on quality, for example, of submissions? Or is it that we're seeing more people from more in different places around the world who are submitting? And the truth is kind of a bit of all of this is happening all at once, but it has created a much larger job for editors at this point in time, which in turn creates a much larger job for peer reviewers at this point in time. It's taxed the system a lot in that way, and that's been a challenge.
Mhm.
And I'll just say a couple of things, Kurt. Thank you very much for the invitation. The journal Distance Education that I've edited for a very long time, as you said, is slightly different. It's actually one of the, it is one of the first journals that was published to cover this field as far back as 1980. Some of you, many of you, all of you might remember a name called Desmond Keegan, who in 1980 wrote a paper defining distance education. These are very early days of distance education, when the field was, at that time, even known as correspondence education, if you vaguely remember. And the term distance education was just coming in vogue because we were moving from print-based materials to other kinds of things, to technology, to audio conferencing, to video conferencing. At that time, there was only one other journal covering this field. It was from a Swedish institution. It was called Epistodidactica. I don't know if some of you might remember that. I mean, I think that died. And then distance education came about in 1980. Actually, the planning of it began in late 70s. And then along with open learning, which comes out of the UKOU, Eurodol, which comes out of Athabasca University, and Michael Moore's, from Penn State, American Journal of Distance Education. And I might throw in the Distance Education Journal, the journal that's published by EDEN, which is the European Distance Education and E-Learning Network. These are the 4 or so or 5 journals that covered the field of distance education. And the term sort of distance education has now transformed into other kinds of things. And when I took on the editorship of distance education in 1990 or thereabout, 1991, 1992, I also tried to, and I think Chris's point is very important in terms of the overall perspective that editors have in terms of how they can shift and how can they the direction that they take journals into. What I tried to do was to move distance education more towards the educational technology framework, and as opposed to keeping it on the periphery, which is what distance education was. So I think I hope we have a bit of a discussion about that today, about how the field has shifted from distance education in the 1990s and the 1980s to educational technology, which covers a broader range of things, and I have tried to do that, to move this without having to change the term distance education, because there's an issue about branding and those sorts of things, to move it more towards the mainstream of educational technology so that it covers a whole bunch of things, not just a mode of learning and teaching. I'll stop there for the time being.
Well said. And you did mention the Aradal Journal. I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, Terry Anderson posted that it was the 25th year anniversary of that journal. It's a special issue. If our readers, our listeners, our watchers and viewers haven't heard of Aradal, it's the International Review of Research on Open and Distributed Learning. It's open access and it's SSCI. It's a top tier journal. It's quite good. They've changed the mission a little bit and are particularly looking for research that has outcomes associated with it. And so they're rejecting a lot of things that they previously would have published, but it's another high quality journal, and maybe Terry Anderson and others are people we need to bring on the show in the future. I think Chris is going to jump in here with a question, and then we go to Punya and then Lydia.
Well, I have a couple observations and a question. So the two roles, it seems to me, that have not only a terrific view of the evolution of a field, but also the opportunity to influence the field, are if you're a program officer at a funding organization like NSF, or if you're in a major editorial role in a scholarly journal, because you get to see the span of what people are doing, the strengths that they're exhibiting, the weaknesses that they're exhibiting, the change in topics over time. I'm happy we're doing this show, and I wish that there was more attention paid to the kind of trajectory of knowledge that editors accumulate. So I'm going to make an observation about two kinds of articles that I kind of groan when I see in scholarly journals, and then one kind of format that you might consider more of. So I really don't like articles where if you gave the average educator the headline in the article, they could predict the findings immediately without reading anything. And, the kind of obvious research I find troubling. And I'm not saying this from a position of, elite universities don't do this. I'll deliberately make this vague, but I was kind of appalled by a dissertation that came out of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, in which the author proudly concluded that kids who came to school sick learned less than kids who didn't come to school sick. And it's like, duh, can't we study something that isn't obvious? So that bothers me, and I do see it in journals in general. I also see a lot of something is better than nothing studies, where the control group is nothing, and then there's a something that the author has probably developed and is promoting. And wow, it turns out that something is better than nothing. Now, of course, with time on task, unless the something is terrible, it probably is better than nothing, but not by much necessarily. And again, it's just troubling to me to see how much we end up with those sorts of studies. The format that I'd love to get your thoughts on, beyond my categorization of these kinds of articles and whether there's some articles you would add that you wish you saw less of. I gave a keynote at a conference that Michael Moore held in 1995 at Penn State. And I try to use keynotes to be provocative, so I was. And I was so provocative, arguing that we shouldn't call ourselves distance education, we should call it distributed education, that he did a special issue of the American Journal of Distance Education in 1996, where I wrote up a paper based on the keynote. And then he had 10 respondents, 5 who thought it was a terrific and 5 who thought it was bullshit. And it was a really interesting special issue with that kind of dialogue among people. It didn't fit the standard kind of, scholarly journal format, but I thought that it was informative, and I would love to see more of those. So my question at the end of this long preamble is basically just, are there types of articles that you get that you really kind of cringe because?
Yes, there are. And let me just jump right in and and I'm sure that the other editors will agree with this. There is an ahistorical nature to the kind of articles we're seeing right now, where everybody thinks that online learning and distance education were invented in 2022 or 2023 when the pandemic came around. And what we're seeing is this very large sort of cohort of authors who have no understanding of the history of distance education, no understanding of the history of online learning. And it's incredibly frustrating to be constantly writing to the editors, hey, there's 50 years of research on these topics. I'm not sure why you're only citing, your colleagues from the year 2023 and 2024 or 2022. But I think that's really a frustrating piece that we're getting right now. It's such a historical perspective.
Yeah, can I jump in there before you, Vanessa? Chris, I think you made an absolutely important point that I had actually listed down here. I mean, oftentimes you see journals like Distance Education in particular, our rejection rate is like 91%, 92%, acceptance about 10%. And then that does not necessarily make the journal good, but what it tells you is, why are you rejecting 90% of the articles? And it goes back to the point that, Chris, I had those points listed myself, is what is a useful line of inquiry? And I've written an editorial about that, useful lines of inquiry. The majority of the articles that I actually reject, and I'm sure many of the others would agree with me, is because they don't make any meaningful contribution to what we already know. You're going over the same old crap and not even doing that very well. So that's the first point. So why now? So the question one must ask is, why are people devoting so much time to such mundane and useless and meaningless things? What is going on? And that takes me to the second point that Peter has just raised, is that we're not aware of what has gone on. How come we're not aware of what has gone on? And people like, you, Vanessa, I mean, you're dealing with graduate students right now. So I'm beginning to wonder, what is going on in graduate education now? And one of the other things, the third point that I'll leave you with, is methodological rigor. What happened to research methodology? It doesn't have to be quantitative. Any research methodology can be very rigorous. So I'm finding that there is a significant lack of methodological rigor in the articles that I've been getting over 35 years of editing a journal, and people ignoring the lessons learned from the past, or not even aware of it, not necessarily ignoring, but just not aware of it, Peter, which is the point I think you were making. And the final point, of course, which takes me back to what Chris's point is, that why bother with it? There's so many things that I'm reading. I'm saying, who cares about this? What does it add to the literature? Those are the three takeaways that I have been accumulating over these years.
So, Som, I think that you're you're tapping into something really important there. Like what are the useful lines of inquiry, and connecting back to what Peter said. So Peter, when you're talking about all the pandemic stuff that came out, and it was a big issue for us of people confusing emergency remote instruction with actual online, and having to point out that online learning with these decades of history before that. I'm just focusing, narrowly on the online part of distance learning, because of course there is that much longer history of distance that had nothing to do with online as well. But online typically has been learners who have opted into an online program, and instructors who have opted into online teaching, not, oh my gosh, everybody's forced into it right now.
Yeah. That's a huge problem. You're right.
I found that in the pandemic, we saw this surge then, because people were having these experiences of what I've long called the "what I did last summer" essay. Hey, look, guys, I taught an online class and I learned a lot of things, which I think it's a great thing. Like as a fellow educator, I applaud everybody who taught an online class, who was thoughtful about it, who collected a little data about it, who learned from that experience. But you get back to, is it a useful line of inquiry? Is it a meaningful contribution to this scholarly discipline, this scholarly conversation that's been going on for a long time? And it might not be. There's a lot of studies of opportunity then that happen in there. I struggle with like wanting to support people a lot with scholarship of teaching and learning, but at the same time needing to say, it's not just every time you teach that there's something there, and maybe you need to partner with somebody else to find something. They're the ones that I call the SEM because I can.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about,
Yes.
Peter?
Yes, absolutely. There's like this conceptual superficiality and this methodological like overcomplication, where it's like, oh, I've heard of this thing called SCM and I'm going to do it. And I know some people can help me with it. And we're going to do that on this survey that we did. And it's like, what is the survey even about? Oh, it's about application of technology acceptance model to whatever you want it to be about. Artificial intelligence is the most recent one, but it's like it's a constant battle to be like, hey, this has been done by a million people already, and we don't need a million and first one. And you don't even, if you don't know that it's been done a million times already, maybe you should go back and read the literature.
Yeah, and think it's been dissertation season here, and that doctoral students, when they get to that last chapter, they're always exhausted, and so when you have the defense, it's always the finished chapter. You can always predict a revision is going to come in that last chapter. So I'm used to having this conversation with a lot of people, but this has been an issue that I've seen in a lot of the research that's done, is when you get to push back on people and say, so what are your implications? What are your implications for research? What are your implications for theory? What are your implications for practice? And if you're struggling to come up with and articulate those, well, like that's,
maybe you didn't do a great job after all.
yeah. And it's hard to see that, by the way, as an editor. I think sometimes people think editors are cold, heartless people who like to say no a lot. And I find it really hard to see it, because I think about all of the resources that went into producing those studies, all of the time of the authors, all of the time of the participants. I mean, it's so much labor that went into them. And I, a little part of me just dies inside every time I desk reject another piece for a reason like that.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and for some of us, it's like Sam said, 9 out of 10 times, and for you, I think it's probably 9.4 out of 10 times, something like that. It's brutal. I understand exactly what you're saying, and you feel like there was a lot of effort that went into in creating this paper, and you can see that there was data that was collected and it was analyzed, and there's a lot of thought in it. But the thought that needed to precede that didn't happen. Like, is this a good question? Has this question been asked before? Is this going to lead to productive and a substantial contribution to the field? And I think maybe the field's just getting too big for people to understand. Maybe that's part of the problem. The sheer size of the field may be daunting, and folks may not be able to get their heads around it anymore. I'm not sure, but I do everything you're saying. I can feel myself saying, "Yup, yup, yup."
Before we run to Punya here, I just make a quick comment. It's rare that we have three people coming from different parts of the world having a conversation with each other, so we know we've hit the right topic today. you're all you could run the hour. We wouldn't even need to be here because you know the issues that are coming up. But we are going to ask some questions. We're going to go to Punya first, and then Lydia, and then I got come back with one.
Sure. So I have a very serious question to start us off. Why do you guys go with reviewer 2? Why don't you just go with reviewer 1, 3, and 4 and save us some of the bad memes we get. I'm kidding. So the question I have is there's just too many jokes about reviewer 2. So I always wondered if I were an editor, I would never go with 2. I would go 1, 3, and 4 and save the authors a lot of problem, but that's okay. So coming to this issue of getting a lot of articles that are coming in, I'm wondering, there's this Campbell's law, which is that, anytime you use a social indicator for social decision making, then it will get corrupted. So what we have done, we have taken the number of publications that you write as being a measure of how good you are as a scholar. Most institutions, if you have a higher ranked journal, you get more points for it. And now we have AI. And I'm wondering, I mean, how are you dealing with the glut? Because the pressures on untenured faculty to get tenure at a time of, where there is great precarity in the academic job world, not to point fingers, but that is just how we as humans are. Those pressures are real. And the urge to cut a corner or something that way becomes more salient. I mean, recently, Andrew Maynard used Manus or whatever this new tool from China is, where he actually generated data which could then be fed into a research study. I mean, you're going to face some significant challenges going forward in terms of not just text being created, but even data being manufactured that you would have no way of knowing whether it's real or not. And also, the number of publications you get are going to zoom up because you'll be able to churn a lot of these things out, whether with deep research or whatever the new tools, next tools are. I mean, these are baby tools right now. They're going to grow up and become more mature. I wonder how, like, as editors, you are thinking about this, because this is not just a problem today, it's going to get crazy worse in the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years. And I wonder about the nature of scientific research and how we validate things, the whole process. I wonder what you guys are thinking about that, because I wonder about that.
Fools rush in where angels dare not tread. So let me jump on that one. I would say, this is a scary time to be an editor, because you suddenly got a tool that I think a lot of people do not understand, and they feel like, oh, I can use this for this, or I can use this for that. I have not yet seen data that I would say this data looks suspicious and probably was generated by AI. So that may be coming. I don't think we're seeing it now, but certainly AI has been such a hot topic, and we're getting so many submissions on that topic that, we've already done a special issue on it. We'll probably do another one. But yeah, the idea that these deep fake things may extend into the creation of data for studies is a terrifying notion. I don't think there's an easy answer to that one, wouldn't you? But certainly something we need to keep our eyes out for.
Yeah, a quick one, Puni. I think you captured that whole sentiment so well. Kurt was very kind to invite me to a recent talk by Paul Kim from Stanford University, and one of the things that I took away from that was that we also knew was that when you're assessing student learning, how try to make assessment, that's not easily plagiarized, that cannot be easily plagiarized, that can, but you do raise issues like, about AI is going to get better and stronger, and it will be able to do things that'll be very, it goes back to the point that Chris was talking about. Being an editor for a very long time is also useful, because you have a good sense of who is where and who is doing what across the globe in your field. And I certainly can say, in my experience, I have a good idea of where things are coming from, and where credible things are coming from, where not so credible things are coming from. So I'm suspicious of what is coming from where, and more accepting of what things are coming from where. So having that sort of global picture and a long-standing background is very useful. And I think that's an important point because a lot of people don't understand what it takes to be a good editor. And having that international perspective is very important. So having that global, finger or thumb on the scene is important for one to be able to, I think, be able to decipher, because look, dodgy things will come out of places, and it will get better. That's the nature of the world. That's the nature of the world, not necessarily the world we live in, but the world. So being able to decipher those weaknesses, those spots, is one of the qualifications, one of the attributes that editors need to have, or editorial boards need to have.
Before Vanessa jumps in here, I'll just point out that the three guests today have really great antennas. Som's been able to find talent, young talent in the field, and add them to the editorial review board. Peter's been able to find young talent and request that they think about doing a special issue of a journal. And Vanessa's been able to say, here's a real important topic. Let's do a special issue, just jumps in and does one for her journal and different journals and recruits talent to help her out. They've all been people who have mentored the emerging young scholars in the field in different ways. Vanessa, you want to answer Punya's question?
Yeah, I mean, I think as an editor, none of us wants to be the gatekeeper of AI, and we are going to be very imperfect gatekeepers of AI. But like diving deeper into that, and I can, as an editor, I've always continuously reviewed for other journals too, because then I'm seeing things from a different perspective. And I feel like there's something about articles that are authentic. And remember that we see them all the way through the process en masse before they get published. I always have to tell my students, like, you see that stuff that's published, you do know how many people provided feedback on that and how many revisions it went through. It did not look that way when it came into a journal. I think that's an important part. And I think that the pieces that we publish, so many of them, I see just how they have heart. You can feel the human component of them. Now, maybe not. As I was listening to Peter and Sam, I was thinking, it's like, what kind of article did I do? And it's one of those SEM because I can. That's what I would ask AI to do. And so it would come up with the model, and then we'd have some sort of like word salad of constructs, literature review thing going on. And nobody's even interested in reading it because it's just like, to get through this stuff. And there's no real practical meaning behind it. And then you say, like, well, how successful is that going to be anyway? But if you ask AI to do certain, and it's going to get better, but if you ask it to do certain things for you now, it still doesn't quite hit the spot. From a teaching perspective, I had to show some qualitative analysis to people recently, and I needed some data. So I actually used AI to generate fake interview transcripts. And I was watching, I mean, it's a large language model, right? So it was like it was switching things up and creating interviews for me by different participants, but they had this sameness to them. And then I tried to imagine, well, so you start like pulling quotes and putting them in an article, you're still going to get that AI voice of it.
I agree with you, Vanessa. I think if people are using AI to generate data, they should be using it to generate better data than we're getting, because a lot of the data that we're getting is not that great, and a lot of the data that people are collecting is not that meaningful. So yeah, hopefully, if AI is ever going to be involved in this process, you can do a better job than some of the stuff we're getting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any. I mean, I really recommend this link that I just dropped in the chat, Andrew Maynard's, because he used this tool to create a Google survey form, everything, and create synthetic data for 1,000 students. And he was doing it to test the tool out. My first thought was, after reading this, is like, wow,
Now
I can,
what?
that one can create a whole study with synthetic data, which is based on synthetic students, which is an amalgam of what LLM knows. And you can tell it to have some variability in there, make sure there is enough noise in there, that it doesn't look perfect. I mean, it was just a thought experiment in my head. And since you guys were here, I was like, how do you guys deal with that? And it is only going to get more complicated going forward. And I think that systems that we have developed, which, if you go back to the scientific method, I'm going back to the scientific revolution and the whole idea of publishing and being able to point to a piece of data and saying, this is where I go. That's the whole citation system. All of those things are built around a model of print technology. And I wonder whether we are in sort of a cusp of like a switch in that, which I have no idea which way it'll go and what the future of that will be. But I think those are important questions that I sort of puzzle about, again, and sorry to put you guys on the spot, that was not the intent. It was more of like, this is something as a field we need to be thinking about more about.
It's a great question, and you've actually got me now spinning and thinking about things like how wonderful it is to have a forum like this where we're all sitting here talking, because there's this humanness, there's this authenticity to talking, and where you're demonstrating the depth of your knowledge. You can't be looking stuff up. You can't be getting AI to I guess the avatars aren't that good. No, look, it's really me. I can pinch my skin. But like conferences, other things that we do in person, things that we do that are less formal, like this is where the humanity is in the research. And so then this taps into that issue of, well, we're telling everybody you have to publish all of these things. I think the danger is if we tell everybody publish all of these things and people just start doing all these publications and maybe are tempted, and we take that human side down several notches, because that's where we see the expertise. That's where you hear somebody talk about it. Why do we have students defend a dissertation? Because we want to not just have a written document, but to authentically hear them talk about what they did, to know that they understood what they did, that a stats consultant didn't sort out all of their stats for them, the librarian didn't figure out the whole lit review, and so on.
Thank you. I think we can go on this topic forever. I know Lydia's waiting, and we are already at 45 minutes past the hour. But yes, I think these are, I see a parallel between the discussions that are happening around plagiarism in classrooms and like, and how do we do more authentic assessments. I think it's a similar level of discussion, I think, that we need to bring into the journal thing. Lydia, please jump in.
Thank you, Punya. So as editors, you have like this bird's eye view of what is being published, what people are writing about. So since we're already on the topic of AI, so what are you seeing being published about AI? What kind of research are people doing? Any innovative design use of AI that you've seen that in the recent publications?
A quick response to that before you guys jump in. Some of us who are old enough, you remember when we went to grad school years ago. The Clark and Cosma debate, right? Around technology and all of that was so prominent. It was compulsory reading. We all sort of read that, and it was important because it sort of placed technology within a broader framework, within a context, and then tried to have a discussion around, well, what is it that's making the difference? And I think we are missing that conversation when we're talking about AI. When AI sort of came onto the scene, AI is not new. If you look at the trajectory of AI, it goes back to technology, isn't it? Okay, Gen AI is different in the way expert systems were in the 80s and the 70s and so on. I understand that. Still, it is a technology, and I think we are failing to look at AI within the broader framework of technologies and how they impact pedagogy. I find that conversation is missing, and people are sort of identifying Gen AI and AI is something uniquely different and very different, which misses the point, and that's a problem.
Yeah. I would second what Som is saying, and I would also add that, the fact that I don't think like one article or two articles is jumping to mind immediately says to me that really I'd like to see some people do stuff with AI that we're not seeing very much of, and a lot of that has to do with the humanity and the real human nature of teaching and learning on a very social level. Why can't we use AI to do more kind of investigation of the social dimensions of learning and the interactive dimensions of learning? And I don't think we're seeing enough of that. I think people are trying to do things with AI that we're not really ready to do yet. And I'm not one who's that crazy about the idea of like, let's have this be a tutor for everybody and everybody can learn on their own and everybody can be one-on-one with a tutor that's their best friend. It's like, that's not what we need more of. We need less of that. We need more human in the loop kind of thinking. I don't know. Vanessa, you might have another idea.
Well, I think like with what you're saying there, Peter, that's something that I've thought about a lot as an editor. What do we need more of? And I see with a lot of these things about like, interaction in classes and generating robust discussions in classes. We have not sorted this out. If we have sorted this out, then like why does it persist as a problem in settings of practice? It's still something there to be studied. So AI, because of this perception of new, but it's not, because I remember being in my master's program and hearing that within the next 5 years, children will be taught by their one-to-one AI tutors, which like
God, I hope not.
didn't happen, right? Like, and it's still not going to happen. Like, and who wants to put their 5-year-old down in front of an AI tutor every day? Like, not, but so with every technology that comes along, the initial reaction to it is, do people like it? Do people want to adopt it? What kinds of things can we do with this? We go back to the what I did last summer essay. Hey, I tried it out. Here's what happened. And so we see some of those pieces are popping up. They're not necessarily being successful at getting published at this time, because I think a lot of us as editors, or I should just speak for myself here, but I'm looking for pieces that talk meaningfully, going back to what Sam was saying, like, how does AI intersect with pedagogy? What is it doing? And then let's start to connect to the meaningful things like outcomes. What does this mean for us in terms of outcomes?
Well, I was going to jump in next, but Chris made a comment, posted a comment in the chat one you haven't seen. Chris, you want to jump in and add to the conversation here?
Well, I think that a lot of what I see with AI now is it's being used as a kind of digital duct tape to hold together an industrial era education system. Oh, look, something can make more quizzes for me. Oh, look, something can make more multiple choice test questions for me. And what's missing is not the doing things better, but the doing better things that AI opens up and makes possible. But that requires creative thought, and it requires the ability to think about transforming education rather than just doing the same stuff more efficiently. So I'm hoping that there will be a wave of sort of what has happened with past educational technologies is that typically there are some people who take the technology beyond after that initial wave of, oh, good, we can use it to do the same thing better. And I hope that we'll start to see that with AI.
So you all took on the role of editor of a journal with a goal or a mission or a purpose or some life meaning. Now today, this is many years later. What would that goal or mission or that special purpose look like for each of you? Or how would you know you're in or working for one of the ideal journals of the field? How would you know? How would you recognize that your journal has made the impact that you wanted it to make? And I also have a second question. What advice would you give to young people to help them to publish in your journal? Either one of those two questions. I have many. I have about 8 or 10. I didn't know which one to ask, so I'll just throw those two out there. How would you know when you really hit the big time and your journal is a huge success, or you've met your mission or moved it to a next level?
I
And
think
what
the
would
answer
that
to
be?
that's an easy one. You get invited onto Silver Linings for Learning, and bam, you arrived. I don't know. I think for me, I took over in 2014, and when I took over, the journal was almost moribund, and we were getting about 35 to 50 submissions a year. Last year we got over 500 submissions. That's a good thing, and it's a terrible thing, because the good part is you're getting a lot more manuscripts that potentially can be much higher quality, and what you're turning away is stuff that might have been marginal, and you might have had to accept it or in the past, but now you don't have to accept that kind of stuff anymore. We're a small journal. We are our own publisher, and we don't have a lot of resources behind us. So I think that's been a struggle for us. But, what I would recommend for younger people is to really become as familiar as they can with the kind of articles that are published in the journal, and look at articles that are, maybe a little bit, a few years older, they're not brand new, and they've been highly cited, and try to understand why those articles are as highly cited as they are, and to try to figure out what is an important conceptual question. How do I identify a gap in the research where so the gap is both meaningful and substantial and can make a real contribution to the literature? And that's very difficult for younger scholars. It's difficult for anybody, but it's especially difficult for younger scholars. So that's
Yeah,
my
I think
take on those two questions.
I think it's a very good point. If I can pick up on that, Peter, one of the things that I've said a lot of the times is every time you are submitting a paper or undertaking a piece of research to submit a paper, you are joining a conversation. You're not starting, well, very rarely you'll be starting anything that is completely new. You're building on something. So make sure that you're making a useful contribution, because that's the first test. If you're not making a useful contribution to what is already known, this is the whole game about literature reviews, and that's why we spend so much time on getting people to understand the literature before you ask them what is the research question. So you're joining a conversation. Every keynote that I've given on this point, that I start off with a slide with saying you're joining a conversation. Make sure you have something useful to say. That's your first test. Once you pass that test, then you've got their attention. And the other point that I want to leave quickly is the role of the editor is not very unlike the role of a doctoral thesis supervisor or a program director. I've always seen my role as educative. I had never seen my role as some kind of a gatekeeper saying yes or no to things. I've always thought of myself as a nurturer of talent, of young talent. Take something that is promising. Rarely have I think in 35 years of editing a pretty highly ranked journal, there's been only one or two times when an article has gone through with very minimal. One of the times was my own doctoral thesis supervisor, because who I thought was very meticulous about everything. Those are the very few people I can count on my hand the number of times an article has gone through without any modifications to publication. The majority of the times it requires a lot of work, much like you would do as a doctoral thesis supervisor or as a supervisor of that type.
Well, Vanessa's going to add to that, and then Chris has got a comment.
Yeah, I'll take this a slightly different angle on the second question really made me think of like being at AERA and sitting there in the editor roundtables and having people come up as they do and say, how do I publish in your journal? What should I research? And my answer to that is always, you're actually asking the wrong question. I think you need to start with, what do you research? Like, what are you passionate about? That passion, that undying curiosity you have about a particular topic needs to drive your research. And then as you build out your conceptual framework, you start to see the places that you are citing. Yes, to that idea of the research conversation, you see the research conversation you're entering, and that gives you a good sense of the journals that you should be looking to see if you have a fit. But you shouldn't be saying, oh, I want to publish in that one. What do I have to do to publish in that journal? The authentic route to this is really, what do you study and where is the research conversation taking place? And then when you do it, I just want to say, take the time. Everybody's in a rush. Take the time to do the study with rigor. And then at the end, you're in a rush. You just want to submit it to the journal. Writing matters and formatting matters, because the reviewers are going to take a look at it very quickly at first, and then they're going to read through it. But that initial assessment, like, oh, this reference list is a total mess. It is not an APA format at all. I bet that's about how much care they took with their data, right? You don't want people to make those conclusions about your work. So the more care that you've taken, even though it's going to need multiple rounds of revisions, the better it's going to get through those revisions.
So I guess I got to throw away my bucket list. Okay, thank you for that. Chris has a comment.
Yeah, I just want to bring up one more issue and get your thoughts about it, which is I see the field, especially in the scholarly journals, having a tendency to overemphasize methodology and underemphasize impact. I remember years ago talking to a colleague who had done reviewing for the Institute of Education Sciences panel. And she talked about her experience where she was the first to comment on a proposal. And she said, I first saw this study proposed in 1985 and it wasn't interesting even then. So we definitely shouldn't fund it. And the very next person said, this has a wonderful way of doing random assignment among the participants, so of course we should fund it. And that's not an exaggeration. In a lot of the reviews I see, there's all this nitpicking about the methodology, and yes, you want to have the methodology, above a threshold, but the idea that because something is statistically significant, it actually has an impact is a widely mistaken problem, I think, in the research community. You get trivial effects that have statistical significance, and you get potentially powerful effects that fall just short of statistical significance. And it's, oh, well, we'd better accept this one, and this other one, gee, sorry, they didn't reach 0.05. So another hobby horse I'll bring up, and I'm just curious as to your comments on that perspective.
I think that's an important point you bring up, Chris. I think, you start using an N of 2000, all of a sudden the lenses you're looking through are these super, super high powered microscopes that pick up significant differences where they're not meaningful unless the author has the wherewithal to understand things like effect size and try to make some practical contribution. They're looking at statistical significance like it's the be all end all, and that's not really it's not really what it is. So I think it's a good point.
With that, I want to point out that some of this comes from the reviewers, not the editors, but then the editor gets to render that final decision. And I think that's a really important thing, is that, the editor can say, okay, you've been given some good feedback about like how to articulate what you did, the rigor of your method better, and you should do that. But I can say, I want to publish this piece. I think it's important for the world to hear this piece. And that bit about the 2,000 people, well, we get the angry emails from people that say, I had a large sample size. How dare you reject my piece? And but we're making these more complex decisions all the time, just like you're talking about, Chris. And that's the stuff that the editor has to do. But the peer reviewers could help us out here a little bit more.
Quick one. Totally agree with that, Chris. I think the main thing that I'd be looking for is, are you saying anything that, one, for starters, that we didn't know much about? Is it making a useful contribution? I mean, methodology is very important, of course. Yeah, I mean, how do you come to get to that? But that's the second thing on my agenda. Yeah, I'm not so hung up about statistics and all of that. We've been through that in grad school, and even all the problems with that.
I have to tell you all quickly, on one of my own pieces, within the last year or two, I had a peer reviewer come back and tell me that I needed a citation to justify my use of descriptive statistics.
Oh,
of course.
Oh.
So we've run out of time today, but if you've got 15, 20 seconds of advice to give to people in terms of young people publishing a journal, or any final comment for us before we go to the next show.
I think you should have us back on for another show. There's like another 2 hours of the conversation we could have. And I mean, we got maybe half a dozen questions, but there are so many more interesting topics. But, in terms of young people, again, I would just say, make sure you know the literature. Don't just, throw together something kind of quick and hopefully you can get it published, because it's not going to serve you well, and it's not going to serve the field well. Think more conceptually and maybe a little bit less statistically. I think the conceptual pieces are frequently the weakest parts of some of the stuff that we're rejecting a lot of. So if you want your stuff to be accepted, be more interested in the conceptualization, the conceptual contribution you might make than in this methodological contribution, the methodological complexity of your study. So those are my couple of comments.
Thanks, Peter. Vanessa?
What I always tell my students is, first and foremost, follow your passion with rigor in your career, not the metrics. Focus on making a difference in the world, and ideally the metrics should follow.
And Sam, final comment from you.
Along with passion, Kurt and Vanessa, I think it's trying to put a finger on what is worth investigating. It might not be your passion, but what is worth investigating? I mean, that will take a whole lot of things to identify. Why should we bother with it? And being able to put a finger on that, even if you're not passionate about it, but can you make a case and to say, hey, listen, we need to do this. This is why it's important. This is what we know about it. This is what we don't know about it. And this is why we need to do this. So if you've got that convincing game done, you're onto something.
Well, you've just drummed up passion there, Sam. So see, you're doing exactly what I talked about.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, all right.
As opposed to the dispassionate, let me feed this into AI and ask it to come up with a 2,500 participant SEM that looks at these 7 variables. And
I think I agree with you, Vanessa. Nothing can really substitute for passion. And they say education is not about filling a bucket, it's about lighting a fire, and it's an old saw. But really, when you see that student suddenly catch that fire and they really have a burning interest in what they're doing, they will take care of the quality because their interest will carry them through. And that's really, really important. I'm not saying that you're wrong, Sam. I think it is important to investigate important questions, but I think students will get to important questions when they get that fire in them. And once they've got that fire, they'll go anywhere.
Well, I want to thank all 3 of you for enlightening us today. We have a good show, and the guests are all talking to each other and interacting. And also the 6 questions I sent ahead of time, I didn't ask any of them. So, we do need to have you come back on a follow-up show. I appreciate Peter's point there. So thank you for that, Peter. Vanessa, always excellent to talk to you. And Sam, yeah, come back to that. We will have Bob Cosma in my class week 15. He's invited himself to come to my class for the follow-up to the Cosma debate. I think Chris wants to either introduce the next show or he has a comment.
No, I want to introduce the next show, but I just want to say how much I enjoyed this conversation. It was a terrific episode, and thank you for making the time to do this. And thank you for the roles that you play. So next week, we're going to talk about learning second languages. And I see a lot of people who are pitching startups to me, and the vast majority of them are startups about ways of learning English, because so many people across the world want to learn English as a way of having access to sort of global level conversations. And a lot of that language learning is just dismal. I mean, the approaches are dismal, the ideas are dismal. And next week, my colleague, Professor Nicole Mills at Harvard, who is head of the Department of Romance Languages and who teaches the Introduction to French courses, is going to talk about how she uses immersive authentic simulations to help people learn a second language. And she works with Wanda VR, which is a French company that I am an advisor to that uses AI and immersion to create fictional simulations. So you'll hear about a murder mystery in a surrealist art museum in which people are learning the French subjunctive. So I hope you'll come and enjoy the next episode. Thanks very much.